Hey everyone, hope you are all doing very well. Welcome back to another video here on the channel. In this week's video, we're going to be discussing the Nitro engine break-in process. Now, we want to go and maximize the most amount of lifespan that we can get out of the Nitro engine, as well as maximize the amount of performance that we can get out of these as well. Now, what I've done is I've gone through and looked up information from the Nitro engine manufacturers and combined this with what the professional Nitro racing guys are saying. They want to make sure they come in first place every time, and they want an engine that lasts. And those engines last for gallons upon gallons upon gallons of runtime on these engines. Believe it or not, there is a difference between how the Nitro engine manufacturers recommend you to break in your engine and how the professional Nitro racers want you to break in an engine. And the guys who are racing professionally say make sure you follow what we are saying, because this actually works. We test it on multiple different engines, and this is what they've now been using for multiple years. So this is something that is tried, tested, and proven out probably on a larger scale than what a Nitro engine manufacturer has gone through and done with data collection there as well. So I'm taking all of that, combining it, and here we're going to lay it out right now. Let's get started. First thing that we need to do is find a spot with the engine installed in our car where we can run our car. We don't want the car to be necessarily moving around in the first few tanks. So we're looking for a spot where we have some sort of, let's say, cardboard placed down so that we can catch any of the excess oil that is coming out of the pipe. Now you will want to find the location that is somewhat close to an outlet. Otherwise, you will have to provide an extension cord to bring power to wherever you are breaking in this Nitro engine. Now the tool that you will want to plug in is a heat gun, preferably somewhere around 300 watts or so is going to be more than enough. Or if you don't have one of that, you will want to have a hair dryer. Now, if you're really into the Nitro hobby, you probably already have one of these. It's a Nitro head warmer. You can plug these directly into a power supply unit or into a LiPo battery pack. Now, a couple things to work out before we get into the actual break-in process. Whenever you buy a brand new Nitro engine, that engine is going to come from the factory with a very tight pinch, as it's termed in the Nitro world, which means as the piston approaches the top dead center part of the cylinder, it is going to squish that piston and cause a bunch of resistance. Now, what we don't want is we don't want resistance that's going to wear away at the components that are moving through this area at the same time. We want to treat this rather delicately and provide some lubrication so that parts can pass other parts without any issue. What we want to do is we want to use our heat gun or head warmer to heat up the top of the engine up to operating temperatures. Operating temperatures can be found in your manual, and if you don't have a manual that states the range of operation for your engine, it is typically and generally between 185 degrees Fahrenheit to about 215 degrees Fahrenheit. For the first 3 tanks that we are going to break in the engine with, we want to have the engine sitting at idle. However, we want to make sure that the piston is at bottom dead center before we try to start the engine, and we want to make sure that the engine is up to operating temperature before we even start the engine. This is going to allow us to enter that pinch point at the correct temperature to reduce the amount of stresses that are going to be applied to the piston and to the cylinder. Once you have the engine being warmed up, you can begin to bring fuel into the carburetor so you can get it fired up. You can do this through any type of priming process that you prefer. Give it another check to make sure that you are at operating temperature, and if so, you can go through the process to start that engine up. Now that the engine's running, you want to make sure that you're bringing the idle down to something reasonable and erring on the side of it being rich. Now, because the engine is idling, the range of what lean is versus rich is going to be rather narrow, and if you are too rich, you will have the potential for that engine to stall out. Once you have the tune and the idle set for the break-in process, what you want to focus on is monitoring the temperature and making sure that the engine is running between the recommended range of temperature. When the engine's at idle and you don't have the body of the car on, you have the potential of allowing that engine to cool. That's what we want to avoid. And this is why most engine manufacturers will tell you to not break in the engine by idling it, because you're not going to get that engine to the proper temperature. But with our tools, we can absolutely make sure that we're within the specified range of operational temperatures. Once the tank approaches empty, I do prefer not to run it out of fuel. Instead, what I'll do is I'll use an object to just grab the flywheel or touch the flywheel to stop the engine. You could do that generally through the bottom chassis plate of the car. You will want to repeat this process for another 2 tanks of fuel. Just keep in mind that you want to monitor the temperature and make sure that you're within the range. Just from the time of me grabbing the camera and finding the position to place the camera in and hitting record, the engine already came out of that ideal operating range, and I had to heat the engine up to bring it back to that ideal operating temperature, as you see right here. Once you've completed those few tanks there at idle, you'll next want to begin to get the car rolling, and you'll do this in a staged approach. The first tank that you want to do is to run that engine around quarter throttle and then release it. You're going to hold quarter throttle for just 2 to 3 seconds and then bring it back to neutral or brakes to get the engine back to idle. You'll want to repeat this process where you're spending a couple seconds at a quarter throttle, bringing the car up to that speed, and then releasing the throttle and using some brakes to get that engine back down to idle. You'll want to do this for the duration of the tank and then move on to tank number 2. You'll want to repeat the same process that you used before, except the only difference is now you want to use about a half throttle, where you're bringing the car up to about a half throttle speed, whatever that happens to be for your particular application. And once you've done that for 2 to 3 seconds, release the throttle back to neutral, use some brakes, and get that car back down to 0 speed. As you're going through these tanks of fuel, you'll want to make sure that you're keeping the engine running nice and rich. You want lots of lubrication going through the engines during the break-in process. Now, the way that you would be able to identify this is by a nice smoke trail that's leaving the exhaust of the engine as you accelerate. You'll also may notice that the engine hesitates to get up to speed as you see lots of exhaust trail, lots of smoke trails being left behind. This is a good indication that you are running the engine nice and rich. Now, for the third tank, you do want to start to use full throttle, and if the engine is running rich, we're going to need more than a few seconds to get that engine up to higher RPMs. So you want to be doing this where you hold the full throttle for 4 seconds or so, maybe 5 seconds, to get that engine up to a higher operating RPM. And once it hits that higher RPM, then you again bring the stick back to neutral on the throttle trigger and apply some brakes to get the car back to 0 RPM, and then repeat for the entire duration of that tank. At this point, you should have about an hour of runtime, break-in time on that nitro engine, and on the 7th tank, you could start to really open up the engine. And once you have that engine opened, I would still allow the engine to run rich for that final tank. And then on your 8th tank, this is where you can start to tune for true performance to maximize the amount of power that you get. If you use this process to break in your nitro engine, you're going to maximize the amount of lifespan that you can get out of that engine, as well as the amount of performance that you can get out of that engine. Keep in mind, there's a lot of break-in processes and procedures out there. Some of them are good, some of them are repeating in different ways, the same sort of concepts. There are a few things that I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing, but that's why we covered all of the good things to do here in this video. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, like the video if you do. Don't forget to hit that sub button as well as the bell notification so that I can see all of you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one.